How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the podcast. Over here walking the goatees on a non-windy day, as I usually am for the podcast. I need to buy a windmill or something, huh? Got the solar rocking, but we need a little windmill. So today I wanted to talk to you about one of the most planted agave, if not the most planted agave in the world, Agave Tequiliana, or as most people refer to it, Agave Blue Weber Azul. There's a few nicknames for it, and I'll tell you right now why. There's a couple issues with some of them. So people also refer to it as Agave Blue Weber or Tequiliana Blue Weber Azul, which is just a whole mismatch of just weird words, right? So let's talk a little bit about why they're calling it all those weird names. So first, let me tell you the name of the podcast. Actually, the name of today's podcast is going to be "Should the CRT Allow Agave Tequiliana hybrids and separate cultivars to be used in tequila production?" And this is something I was talking about with my friend the other day, because we were kind of ticked off a bit about just how messed up global agriculture really is. He was talking to me about some of the plants that he works with, and we were just going into how the majority of the world's agricultural crops are an actual risk at the moment, because they're like say the majority of food comes from maybe a couple dozen species. Well, each one of those, like bananas or avocados, or pick your plant, right? Corn or whatever. Well, the majority of these species, a handful of cultivars are used, which puts global food at risk. Because right now in banana, for instance, there's a plague that's affecting the main banana production. And I think it's only 2 different species, with one of them being over 90%. Don't quote me on that, but it's pretty high. And right now, it's spreading like wildfire through banana plantations around the world. They're trying to create different species that are resistant to it. And they're running into a lot of issues that USA Citrus has, where, you can't really beat nature. I mean, I give the example of UC Davis and University of Florida, for decades have researched citrus, and they haven't come up with citrus that is resistant to greening. Yet, I remember reading a story of a lady who threw a grapefruit in her backyard, and the son happened to be a citrus researcher, and he saw this tree didn't have greening and realized it could be huge, because he took it back to his lab and realized that it actually had the greening, but it was growing completely healthily. Is that a word? I don't know. It was growing very healthy, and unlike the majority of Florida citrus, had a great production. So 50 years of research of some of the best publicly funded universities couldn't beat a lady just throwing a fruit on the ground. That type of shit always cracks me up. But to just show you how futile the attempt at finding new species for banana will be, the few that they have found are actual natural banana species that they're just now bringing out the wild, much like our ancestors did. But this is the case in everything. You look at avocado, it's Mexicola and Haas. You look at wine grapes, it's really just one species in a handful globally, with that one species being the majority. You look at strawberries, you look at tomatoes, you just take my word for it. It goes on for almost every single major agricultural crop. Okay? It's a handful of cultivars. And it's a real big risk right now because these cultivars, because we've planted giant commercial and industrial scale monoculture, has started to come under threat by pests and, diseases that are spreading like wildfire throughout everything. Because if one farm laxes on biocontrols and starts to create a plague, I'll give you an example. Cochineal was never identified in, agave up until, well, here's the thing. I personally never saw cochineal on agave up until the past decade. And I started seeing a lot of new nurseries coming into the game and a lot of nurseries growing, and I think that cochineal is there because the majority of them are severely overwatering their agave. Like the majority of agaves that I bring here from nurseries, I do not water for 2 to 3 months, minimum 1. And severely overwatered. The majority of them come, I wouldn't say majority, but a small minority of them come with plagues and stuff, and that's how I get rid of them, by drying them out. Cochineal, that works really well with the cactus as well, drying it out. But the point here that I was trying to make, let me relate this real back, I weave a lot. The point that I was trying to make is that if one farm laxes on biocontrols, overwaters their agave, creates this cochineal on agave, and then a humidor comes, harvests his agave for him, he goes to the next farm, and the next farm, and the next farm, and the next, and he's spreading this pest everywhere. That, I come from landscaping, and when you cut down trees, this is something that you even charge for. You give me, you charge the client an extra 15 minutes of labor just so you can clean every single one of your blades. You get me? Because you don't want to be indirectly spreading from one client to the other client, either through plants or trees, diseases or pests, because you didn't clean your tools. And, the ficus in LA that's super popular, that's why they're all starting to die. Arborists have started to spread fungus through all of them by trimming them and cutting them. And most of that actually has been done by the city because they are lax on biocontrol. So, the point that I'm making here is that once one farm falls in a monoculture industrial system, they may all fall. That is a very big issue. And bringing this even further back to agave. Agave Tequiliana has had already its fair share of scares. It had, pest in a couple decades ago that almost completely took out the industry. You get me? And they didn't learn anything. It's incredible. They had agave weevil recently start to take out lots of farms. You get me? So they've had diseases, they've had pests that have almost wiped out tequila. Why they don't allow biodiversity within the Norma, it's a little freaking crazy to me, to be honest with you. Because to even ask the question, will there be tequila in 100 years, and say I am uncertain, that's a fucking issue, man. Because I couldn't tell you and guarantee you that is the case. I could tell you right now there will be agave in 100 years. Will there be Agave Tequiliana? I don't know, man. And here's where it starts to get even fucking crazier. So, Agave Tequiliana, most people see it as its own species. Sorry to break it to you, Jaliscienses. I am from Jalisco too. But it is not. All genetic research points to Agave Tequiliana, real name being Agave Tequiliana or Agave Angustifolia, subspecies Tequiliana. You get me? Variety. Here's where the Weber comes in. Weber Blue. So, the Norma, for some reason, started to call it Agave Tequiliana Weber, or Blue Weber. That's where a lot of this English confusion came in. But Tequiliana is an Angustifolia. I'm going to have to get into the history of this a little bit, huh? Well, let me tell you what. In the 1890s, you had Weber, the guy who's in the Tequiliana name. This dude is a Frenchman, botanist. Comes over to Mexico. He's like, what's up with all these agave? He starts classifying them. He narrows down 5 species of Angustifolia. And he only describes, the subcomplex or the complex of the family of Angustifolia. He didn't go into each of these different varieties except for mentioning that the Angustifolia, subvarietal that the natives named Azule was the one that was the most used for tequila production. So this is where he saw they were calling it Azule, yet when he classified it, they have to cite his name because he's the classifier. So he changes the name to Agave Tequiliana, but in the citations now it's Agave Tequiliana Weber for the scientist. You get me? And where the blue comes in is they named it Azule. Azule. Well, there's another subvarietal of Angustifolia called Azul with just Azul. Completely different. This is where a lot of confusion comes in. So this is why, the Espadín Tequiliana hate or conflict or rivalry has always been hilarious to me. It's really two brothers of the same mom fighting, because it's like Espadín grows quick for a reason. It's the same shit as Tequiliana almost. It's just a little bit different of a cultivar. And then, this is even more weird because there is an agave named Agave Weberi, right? Which this agave is another researcher's name, right? But it's in a different type of agave. The Agave Weberi is actually a type of what's the agave name on it? It's a type of sisal. So it's a completely separate side of the agave family. You get me? Not even on the same page at this time. So Weberi gets confused a lot, but it has that I at the end. That's how you know it's not the Tequiliana, right? So Tequiliana has taken on basically the role of it being its own species when it always has been a subspecies of Angustifolia, and for some reason just, people started misclassifying it. I don't know why. And people will fight you over this, by the way. They are very intent on saying that Agave Tequiliana is like the superior plant over a lot of the stuff coming out of Oaxaca and Mezcales. But they're more similar than not. I don't think you could say that one is greater than the other. To get back to my question, though, should the CRT allow hybrids and cultivars? So here in California, there's not only 5 cultivars of Tequiliana. I've seen Agave Tequiliana in a lot of different forms. You know, there's a really cool one called Listado, which a lot of people call it variegated Agave Tequiliana here. There's, and that's an even crazier one, right? Because if Agave Tequiliana is a subspecies of Angustifolia, so it's Agave Angustifolia subspecies Tequiliana, the variegated or the Listado would be cultivar, right? So this is now a super long fucking name. But then there are Tequiliana hybrids. I've seen Tequiliana crossed with Americana. I've seen it crossed with, I've seen it crossed with Espadin, which is one of the favorite hybrids that I've ever seen. I've seen it crossed with a Potatorum. I mean, this is just off the top of my head. I know there's probably dozens of Tequiliana hybrids, right? And maybe dozens of Tequiliana cultivars, because it's one of the most highly cultivated species in the world. You're telling me no fucking pops and no seeds popped out that were different? Like, the opposite is actually, like, more likely, right? That there's probably a whole fucking ton of cultivars out there that people are just throwing away and don't give a fuck about because they're not fitting into production. Well, here's my thing. If the same things we're talking about, how global food is at risk because it's a monoculture industrial handful of species system, there may be a day where tequila goes away if they do not bring in hybrids and do not bring in other plants. You get me? And I'm going to have to come back to this real quick because I actually forgot I have a meeting. But I'll be back in an hour. Hey, what's up, everyone? I'm back. So, picking up where I left off, the Agave Tequiliana hybrids and different cultivars. These are things that need to be, I believe, incorporated into the Mexican Tequila Norma to allow for Tequiliana to have a greater chance at surviving the 21st century, because it's basically a fucking clone army of agave, like Star Wars or something, it's like they're all the same. Whereas, I'm trying to think right now. I have an Agave Tequiliana striata, which is a certain type of variegation on it. I have the Listado. I have, the main Azule, which is from Mexico, from Jalisco. And I have a few hybrids of it mixed in with Mangaves. And so essentially my point is, if I, as a very small farmer, can have a dozen different agave species with 50 or more % genetics of Tequiliana, and the plants are looking very similar, growing very similar, they might just have a couple different changes in the plant. I believe they can be used for the same type of production. You might have a slower production, but that's actually something that might be favored by a lot of the consumers, because they want those older year agaves. So if you're planting in succession where you could harvest every year, that's not going to matter too much anyways after your first cycle. And then you have different genetics in Tequiliana that are now being used in Jalisco for spirits, right? And say the Azule cultivar, so the Agave Angustifolia subspecies Tequiliana that was founded by Weber, which was nicknamed Azule by the indigenous, right? So that main species, if it gets a plague or pest that completely decimates the industry, you have lots of other diverse Tequiliana cultivars or hybrids or even interspecies hybrids. You know, if you want to mix some agave or different agave family plants into that mix, you know, you're going to have the best chance of this plant, you know, bringing back that industry from the floor, right? And this is something you see, once again, relating it again back to the citrus. Now that there are several citrus species that are identified as being less susceptible or fighting off greening better, then now these species are planted and there's a regeneration of the citrus industry in America, right? Once again, there's lots of, you know, correlations here in California. So we have our own pest here in California, which is like, if I remember, I don't remember the exact name on it, but it's the HSB, which is like some crazy Asian name. I don't mean any offense by that, but it's just like some shit I can't pronounce. But it's this little pest that's destroying a lot of different citrus, from orange to grapefruit to, you know, the whole citrus family, right? And you can't move citrus in or out of California because of this. So now we're really having to see all these backyard growers that have developed, hybridized, and, you know, started from seed, tons of different citrus, and a lot of these varieties are starting to be cultivated inside California and moved within California because of this pest, right? So we're seeing a lot of these varieties are very resistant. So that may be a type of program that Jalisco wants to do for itself, creating, you know, a Tequiliana genetic database of all these different cultivars, hybrids, and interspecies hybrids that Tequiliana could do well with and fits in their goals of production, and even getting geneticists involved at this point and cataloging all the genes of these different cultivars and seeing which ones you really want to prioritize, and seeing how those genes can be prioritized. And you know, a lot of people always tell me, oh, the Tequiliana listado or the striata or, you know, a hybrid, it's like you only got a few of them. How are you going to ever allow that to, or blow that up to where it can make a difference in the industry, right? Well, this, as much as I don't like tissue culture, this is where tissue culture comes in, because you can take a few plants and tissue culture, you know, super large amounts of agave within just a few years, sometimes 2 to 3 years, and you can now have whatever amount of that agave that you really want. But at the same time, because now you have another clone army, you don't want to repeat the problem again. So then you're going to want to promote seed and bulb propagation to get, you know, genetic variants and start creating new cultivars from that tissue cultured Tequiliana species that was the savior in this situation, right? So it could get really interesting allowing these species, because one problem I have with tequila right now is that, you know, mezcal can use so many agave types, so it allows them. Man, people are not letting me record today. I swear. I got hit up right in the middle of the podcast. Well, anyways, back again for the second time, and going off of where I finished there is, yeah, tissue culture has the potential to bring a lot of these smaller varieties that are just a handful in maybe collectors or small farmers' hands, and producing a large amount of them. And then it's going to be important to get genetic diversity after that first generation by starting seeds and bulbs, right, as I mentioned. But yeah, I think that because mezcal can use so many different types of, what do you call it, agave, it is now something that maybe is only 2 to 3% today of the agave spirits industry. but it will become, I believe, a dominant force over tequila over time, because it just has so many different varieties that you could produce spirits from, and all these different varieties could go in different microclimates, different states, different regions, right? And tequila is very limited. It's put itself into a box by only having the Tequiliana variety. So if it opened itself to Tequiliana hybrids and Tequiliana cultivars, it's going to have the best chance to remain competitive and dominant in the agave spirit industry as it develops in California, or a bunch of different areas. You know what I mean? So that's where it's going to get really, really interesting. And 1 second, somebody just keeps frickin' texting me. I'm going to mute them. But yeah, it's going to get really interesting, and for tequila to stay competitive, it needs to adapt itself to the changing, market. And having one cultivar type as your only resource for a tequila industry that today is probably over, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry that's probably over $10 billion globally. So if it wants to maintain that market dominance and that ability to continue to grow, it needs to get genetic diversity, and a lot of this genetic diversity, I believe, is going to come from natural hybridization and starting Tequiliana from seeds, how a lot of small farmers are doing in Jalisco, and getting a lot of these really, really nice different cultivars, right? And that's what's going to save, in my opinion, tequila, because it's in a really, really bad spot right now, and everything is, the agave price might be on the floor, but everybody's growing tons and tons of agave, and there's, a boom in mezcal and tequila, right? So you could say, oh, things are going really smooth for the tequila industry, even though agave farmers are getting screwed right now. But if they want to maintain, the rate of growth, or even a higher rate of growth, then they need genetic diversity. So, in my opinion, I believe that tequila should adopt these different cultivars and hybrids, and the Norma needs to be changed to allow for that, so that we continue drinking tequila into the 21st, 22nd, and all these different centuries, right? Because now in a changing climate, for instance, a lot of Agave Tequiliana is, it's a water-loving agave, even though agave as a family is generally drought-tolerant. So it's an agave that now is being called into question versus a lot of environmental factors, like getting rid of groundwater and, deforestation and things like this. And, when you have a monoculture of one cultivar of agave, you start to have lots of different issues. So if I know tequila wants to stay very traditional and maintain itself with only Tequiliana, but this may be a way for it to adapt to the new market and new environment, and still maintain its tradition, right? It's like a compromise versus only maintaining the Tequiliana cultivar, and then, 20 years down the line, that being completely destroyed, right? And then them having to maybe make a GMO Tequiliana, or different types of solutions that I've heard being thrown around, if a plague were to come and destroy the industry. So it's better to be proactive about this than wait for it to happen, And agave has so many species, right? Like 200 wild species, and thousands of hybrids, interspecies hybrids, and cultivars that people have developed. And, it would be a shame for tequila to be destroyed as an industry only because they did not allow their farmers to do what they've been doing for centuries and millennia, which is plant a genetically diverse quantity of agave, multiple species and stuff. And, you know, me, my family in Jalisco, we still talk about how my grandpa, you know, like he didn't even do monoculture. He had Agave Tequiliana, Salmiana, Potatorum, Maximiliana. Like back in the day, even just a few generations ago, even in Jalisco, it was not, let's just plant Tequiliana. And there was, before the Norma, lots of Jalisco mezcaleros. You know, now they've taken that word away from them and their culture away from them, but you need to bring a little bit of that back, you know, because those agaveros that planted very diverse agave farms in Jalisco that didn't destroy the environment, it actually improved the environment and groundwater resources. You know, if some of them had the opportunity to bring in Tequiliana hybrids and stuff, it would help a lot of the industry and bring back some of their tradition and culture that was lost when the mezcaleros of Jalisco lost their, you know, denomination, you could say, by it going to other states. So it's a really interesting time in tequila, and yeah, I hope if you learned anything from this podcast, it's that there's no guarantee that tequila will be available throughout your lifetime, but there's a lot of people working on creating a lot of genetic differentiation within the species to not only save it, but improve it and make it something that continues to produce really, really good tequila. So, yeah, that's the podcast today. I think I answered the question. I believe that the hybrids and cultivars of Tequiliana should be adopted into the Norma, and there's a lot of positive implications of doing so. I hope that's a conversation that the CRT has with their farmers at some point in time. But hope you learned something today. Have a good rest of your day. Peace out, everyone.